Sure.
Okay, just want to start by saying thank you so much for taking the time out to sit down and chat with me. I suppose we should start right at the beginning. How did you first fall in love with theatre? How did you first get exposed to it?
Wow. That's right at the top. I'm gonna rack my brains. I think probably the best answer I can give to that question is that I remember the first piece of theatre I saw and like properly fell in love with. And it was when I was in school. My secondary school actually had like a little theatre space, and it used to receive companies. Companies used to tour,
Hmm.
and they used to come into the school. So I was pretty bad at school. I had no vocation. I had no real direction. I wasn't good in any one subject, except for drama, because my drama teacher sort of recognized something, I suppose,
Hmm.
that he thought was that it was good that I could do that made me useful in school. And he sort of pushed me. It was about year 10, and I was really a bit directionless up until that point. And he sort of pushed me into going to see more stuff, joining the after school drama club, doing some of the school productions, which I'd never done before. And so, just on his advice, I sort of went and saw
Hmm.
this show. And this show was called BLT. And it was a bit of a madcap sort of clown show, very like European kind of avant-garde. They had this big set piece in the middle that transformed and revolved. And the story was essentially about two brothers who are butchers, and they own this butcher shop, and they make sausages and all this kind of stuff. And their relationship comes under threat when a mysterious woman arrives, and she's a beautiful stranger, and they
Hmm.
both fall in love with her. And then it turns out that she starts having an affair with both of them. And I remember that there was parts of the set that spun to reveal a sort of a window of a bedroom, and one brother was on the outside, and then it spun around. It was
Uh,
back in the butcher's shop, and there was one of them fell into a sausage machine, and their head was coming out of one end and their legs were coming out the other. So it's just this
hmm.
exposure to this big mad colorful cartoony sort of world. And I sort of fell in love with that show, and then pursued kind of more experiences like that. And I suppose in pursuing more experiences like that, I just started going to see lots of
Hmm.
theater and got really interested. And the twist at the end of BLT was that the mysterious stranger was actually a vegetarian, and it was her desire to sort of break the
Hmm.
brothers apart. She kills them both in their meat grinder and takes over the
Ah.
shop into a vegetable shop. So it was this mad far fetched idea. But I think when I think about that piece of work, I think I can see how it influenced a lot of what I do. And yeah, so I suppose that was my first falling in
Hmm.
love with theatre. And then when I started making it, I started to realize where I was useful. So I
Hmm.
sort of pursued that and have never really done anything else.
How did that change go from then sort of performing to writing and creating?
I think it was always part of the parcel for me, really, because I think I was inherently less interested in like the classics
Hmm.
and putting on plays that were written by somebody 50 years ago. So I think I've always been interested in sort of having an idea and thinking about an idea and sort of manifesting that with lots of other people through the processes that we go through. And when I went to university, I met two really important people in my life who I set up a company with. And we all shared that philosophy of that devising theatre philosophy
Hmm.
where we've got an idea, we're going to make it. But if we're going to make it, how are we going to make it? Well, we're all going to write it, we're all going to direct it, we're all going to perform in it. So all those things were
Hmm.
happening simultaneously in my early career. And I suppose moving through my career, there's been opportunities where I've just directed or just written or just performed. And so those strings to the bow can exist separately or all together. So I suppose not really necessarily being drawn to traditional like
Hmm.
theatre making, traditional plays kind of led me to the devising methodology, which is that
Hmm.
combination of all those things sometimes.
Does your brain have to work differently then when you're kind of directing and starring in? Is there a different way you have to think about the show construction than say just directing or just performing?
Yeah, absolutely. So to talk about the Tiger Face show, it's a good example because I spent a lot of time making that show on my own,
Mm,
making that show without a director. And so I was kind of writing it, designing it,
mm.
building things for it, performing it. And so the process of performing it, it started off very much in like cabaret spaces and open mics and things like that, where I would just show up as the character and I'd start to play those games with the audience and I'd start to kind of make things
Oh.
happen. And then that shifted into the world building around that character when I did a Bristol Old Vic ferment residency where I had to be a little bit more, I guess, formed. I had to
Mm,
bring the idea together in a bit more of a significant way. So I ended up doing a half an hour, 40-minute sort of scratch version of the piece, which I'd self-directed. And funnily enough, Charlotte, who was my director for the version of the show you saw, she came to see that. Charlotte Lewis, who's an incredible like director and thinks like very much in the same way I do, that she wrote on one of the feedback forms at Bristol that she'd like to direct the show if it was ever
oh.
going to fruition, and that just sort of has planted the seed for that. I had worked with another director who's also amazing, incredible, Paul Jenkins in the middle, but
Mm,
we didn't end up making that full production together, and that's when I reached out to Charlotte, and we ended up making the show that you
mm,
saw. So actually, to be in it and to direct it and to write it is a bit of a complex task. And something I say to a lot of freelancers that I work with, or a lot of performers who are going to want to do that stuff, that actually you don't need to do it yourself. And actually,
mm,
that collaboration and bringing those other people in and making space for those other voices. So I didn't direct the show you saw. Charlotte
mm,
very much directed the show you saw, and she was fundamental in it. And I think sometimes as the person whose name is at the top of the flyer
mm.
or whatever, we have a bit of an overwhelming desire to be credited for everything. But I actually think it's really important to
I see.
acknowledge that there's lots and lots of other people that
Mm.
made that show what it was.
So you talked about the Tiger Face show. So how would you describe it to someone who hasn't seen the show?
Well, I think your review was very good. So props to you. I really, really enjoyed it. There were layers in your review that I think like made me understand that you understand it. So
Mm,
like, how you perceived certain things or what you felt it was about 3 layers deep was felt really accurate and
mm,
appropriate. I suppose how I would always describe it to someone is that um I always sort of want to have quite a serious conversation in
mm,
quite a stupid way, serious conversations in silly ways because they help us have serious
mm,
conversations. And I think I would describe it as a kind of mad-capped hour that is kind of part pure entertainment and part kind of deep and meaningful.
mm.
Uh, that's probably not a great description, but it leaves out all the caveats of children's television show, nostalgia, puppets, and a bit of foulness and stuff. But I think like yeah, you might get that from
Mm.
from having a look at videos or something.
And I know you said about that sort of the original show kind of being quite, I suppose the original show you saw back
Yeah,
in the day being quite eccentric and quite, and you could see that sort of seep through into your performance of the Tiger Face. It is there's everything. There's a bit of song, a bit of puppets, a bit of climbing on things, and yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think when I think about BLT, the memory I have of it, yeah, I think it was really formative. And I think as you're developing your work, you're subconsciously sort of developing a
Mm,
style as well. You might not be that aware of the style that you're sort of creating. So I think, with a show like the Tiger Face show, I really lean into it and understand that probably my genre or whatever or my style or my
mm,
what my work is about the absurdity of everyday life and
mm,
about manifesting that absurdity in quite bold, big ways. So
mm,
the energy is big and bold, that it looks big and bold, it feels big and bold. And I think hopefully that audience relationship with the work, it translates and the audience feel the experience of the work as well as kind of see all of that stuff that's
mm.
happened.
And you talked about it obviously growing and developing, but sort of where did it come from? How was the Tiger Face show born initially?
Um, so initially, it was genuinely, literally born out of a photo shoot that me and those two people I mentioned, Georgina and Antonio, who I
Hmm.
set the company up with, we were sort of jobbing and like trying to make as much money as we could because we weren't making very much money, and we were starting this company and it was really, really difficult. So we were just kind of taking all these opportunities as they
Hmm.
came to us. And one of the opportunities that we got was to do a go to a shopping center and do a photo booth for like kids and families, right?
Hmm.
So thought of this idea of doing a natural safari sort of thing. So we got I got a tiger onesie and I was a tiger, and I think Georgina was a monkey and she had a monkey onesie, and then Antonio was like a safari guy with a big hat and
Hmm.
a gun and stuff. And we had a green screen, and we invited kids and parents as they came into the shopping center to take photos with us, and we'd pose and we'd dress them up either as animals or other
Hmm.
safari guards and things like that. And we had a photographer taking photos of us, and the idea was that we could generate those photos instantly and give them to people. And no one paid for it; it was paid for by the festival we were working for. And in one of the photos that the photographer caught, and he's a good friend of mine. He's still a friend of mine. David Bland. He's an amazing like photographer,
Hmm.
like incredible. He was just sort of taking photos when we weren't kind of on, when we
Yeah.
weren't doing the. And he caught one photo of me in this tiger suit where I was obviously like, it's a long day. You're posing with loads of kids all the time. You're sort of worn out.
Hmm.
You're getting lots of public attention. It's quite exhausting. And he just caught this photo of me, just sort of staring off into the distance, like miserable face, but surrounded by this
Hmm.
tiger suit, right? So it was this idea of like misery within joy, and this idea of like depression within the like
Yeah.
having to perform, and having to put on a face where even if deep down you're miserable. And so that was the really first starting point of the whole idea. So the whole idea then was about showing up and making people feel like what they were about to experience was joy, and actually that joy slips away, and what they understand is the person delivering them the joy is actually miserable.
Hmm.
And so that used to happen at like cabaret and like spoken word nights and open mics in various different places. The foyer, the Sherman, I remember I was like juggling eggs and people were coming up, and we were, and so there was all these like really
Hmm.
mad bits that aren't in the work and aren't the work's not about yet, but it was always about that central kind of
Hmm.
idea of like the misery within the joy. And so following that naturally and building the world around it, I think it became really clear that that character should be somebody that is a kind of prophet of joy that crumbles and breaks. and
Hmm.
and I just think then I don't remember how it worked, but I just think there's a lot of that in kids TV. You
Yeah.
know, kids TV. I feel like those presenters might feel a bit of that.
Yeah, and like like I said in the review about having this that sort of switch on moment, despite what
Yeah,
you've gone through or what you've experienced that day, you have to be on when the
yeah,
lights go up. It's quite
yeah,
interesting as an actor, you playing that role because you have to switch on to portray someone switching off
yeah,
almost. So I suppose
yeah,
you've got that added layer of sort of complexity into your portrayal of the character.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
is there sort of influences you've taken for that sort of character and where how he turns off, how that expresses itself?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think yeah, I haven't really thought about it. It's really interesting. It's like I get a lot of joy out of doing that show, but at the same time, I am within it broken,
Mm,
and that is always sort of true for all of us.
mm,
Like the idea of how we sort of centered mental health within the work was really carefully done, and we had a lot of consultation, and we were thinking about what that means, and actually looking at the idea of mental health not as a condition but as an ongoing
mhm,
sort of thing we have a relationship with, right? So sometimes we're okay, sometimes we're not okay. That's everyone has mental health, right? So actually I'm always going to meet the show like where I'm going to meet it as a performer. So
Mm.
I might be having a really shit day, or I might be having a really incredible day. But actually, like all the things associated with performing are, endorphins and
Mm.
adrenaline and all those things that help you feel better. So sometimes it's me feeling really good about doing the show and pretending I'm not having a great time. And sometimes it's me not being the best I could be,
Mm.
but having to do the show because people have bought their tickets and the venues, open.
Yeah.
So I get a lot of catharsis out of really getting to like rip it apart,
Mm.
so the show allows me to do either or thing. And I suppose my influences, there's a few. I think like always Rick Mail
Mm.
will like
Yeah.
live in my body and in my muscle and in my face and in every performance I ever do because I was obsessed with him growing up. And then in terms of like theatre makers and theatre performers, I remember a performer called Red Bastard, who is a guy, I can't remember his name. His first name's Eric. He's a clown. I think he's from New York, maybe. He's from America, certainly. I remember going to see his work, and he kind of dresses as this sort of amorphous, sort of red blob,
Mm.
and he has this like ghoulish face, and he's very much like a bouffon clown, and he exists in the room as this sort of strange, like otherworldly character, this sort of entity that's like teasing the audience or turning the audience into a confessional or tricking the audience, and he's quite mischievous. And the experience of watching him and feeling how that performer is harnessing the energy of the room and like that laser focus towards him, I found a lot of inspiration in that. And just in terms of, I guess, deconstructing it after watching it, I could recognize where things were written and where things were kind of, I don't want to say improvised, but things that happened because they
Mm.
happened. I think that show, I went to see it twice and it was almost entirely different both times I went to see it, except for these moments that were scripted. And the way that he held the performance quality within the chaos was
Mm.
something I took a lot of inspiration from. And then I love just like the vaudeville and the old school and the
Mm.
silent movies and the mime, the masters of all that stuff like Buster Keaton and Laurel and Hardy and Charlie Chaplin and yeah, with that presentation and that
Yeah.
like understanding how the body works and all that kind of stuff. And I think like as well there's, and I don't know if the quality of it is too much in the Tiger Face show, but something I became like obsessed with like kind of before lockdown and over lockdown and since lockdown is like drag as a performance, and
Mm.
drag as a performance of a, like drag as a performance of identity, and drag as an over the top performance
Mm.
of identity. And how like, you know there's so much interesting performance quality to drag in terms of how it can be comedic, how it can be tragic, and to me it feels really, really melodramatic. So it
Mm.
really works. It hinges itself in the old school, like melodramas and like vaudeville performances of like, the big expressive like feeling that you get.
Mm.
So I think like a lot of sort of that is in the show, maybe
Mm.
in terms of like the expression of those feelings is this physical sort
Mm.
of performance. Yeah.
So there's a sequence in the show where you bring an audience's members' dreams to life.
Mm.
What has been the sort of wildest dream that you've been tasked with bringing to life?
Okay. So Kirsty, like every single time we do the show, Kirsty makes those things fresh, right? So that's one thing
Mm.
that I want to tell everyone, because we get a few emails and like we got a few messages on Instagram, and it's people's biggest genuine curiosity about the work, I think, which is how does that happen and what's the process?
Mm.
So the process is that Kirsty will take a dream from the audience, take it backstage, and then for that first half an hour, 30, 40 minutes of the show, she's making that costume as fast as she can. And so, yeah, the one you saw, we had a volcanologist, a
Yeah. Yeah.
volcanoologist, I said. Yeah, but a volcanologist. I was told after the show it's pronounced. And that was great. That was Roe, and Roe was absolutely awesome, and like took that on with like, you know, performed that so well. So the weirdest one, we did one where someone wanted to be an ice cream fish lady. So yeah, she wanted to be serving ice creams, but as
Hmm.
a um, so I don't know where that came from, but again, it's about that
Hmm.
child's mind, I suppose. Like, what, when someone asks you when you're a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? That's probably something a kid would say that's a bit
Hmm.
weirder. So yeah, so she came out. That was at the other room when we did a run at their spring fringe, and that was really really cool. Another highlight that I've got for someone was someone wanted to. I think their all their dream was to want to fly, and so I think Kirsty then sort of figured out what that might look like, and it was a lady that was a sort of plain bird,
Hmm.
like huge wings that like took up the whole thing. So sometimes they're really practical, like, you know, uh, uh, like a police officer, or like you know, like an explorer or an astronaut or
Hmm.
something like that. They're quite those well-known things, but sometimes people do curveball us. In Swansea for this tour, we had I think it was a senator. So someone was dressed with the back of a horse completely made out of cardboard, and a bow and an arrow and horns and things. That was very, very cool as well. And shout out to them because they absolutely like nailed the presentation of that. Yeah, it's a lot of pressure for an
Hmm.
audience, right? You just get like pulled up, dressed up, and thrown on stage. So like when people do it with such like, you know, confidence,
Hmm.
it's amazing.
What was your dream then? What if you were taking part of as an audience member? What would you put down as your dream?
Um, so I had a few, and Tiger was actually one of them.
Hmm.
Duck was actually one of them as well. That was when that was when I was very young. But I think if you'd have asked me when I was a kid, I think probably that the truth in the show is that I would have probably said something like, I want to be like a Hollywood actor.
Hmm.
You know, like I want to be like famous and a Hollywood actor and in big movies and all that stuff. And so I think like a lot of the ideas of success and failure in this show, which
Hmm.
is about like not necessarily becoming exactly what it was you wanted to be, or finding a version of that that will satisfy you. I think that's the reality for me, like
Hmm.
doing that show. The reality for me is I didn't get to be what I wanted to be. And actually by doing the show, I've sort of figured out that that's okay. So that's kind of what we're trying to share.
Hmm.
So I think, yeah, Duck, Tiger, or Brad Pitt.
The Holy Trinity.
Absolutely. What a tattoo that would make, a bat cat. It's an incredible big, like, yeah. Brad Santa. Yeah.
So I'm coming to the end of my questions, but I have got a few more. So, what advice would you have for young people looking to get into acting?
Bro, that's a great question. Authentic, be authentic, authenticity,
Hmm.
1,000%. I think like show up as you, and reveal what it is that you have got. What is it
Hmm.
that makes remarkable and special and incredible? I know the job of acting is to take on the persona and the physicality and the being of somebody
Hmm.
else. And so it feels like the best people for that job are blank canvases, you know. So I think a lot of the training we get is be a blank canvas, show up and show that you're versatile, show up and show that you're nothing until
Hmm.
you're given the part, right? But I actually think like the opposite is more impressive and is better, and following that authentic pursuit in terms of, if you're an actor that's going to make your own work and start writing and creating your own stuff, then that authenticity is going to be really really useful for you,
Hmm.
because it's going to be about you doing you. And I also think if you think about the list of like some of the most incredible actors that have ever been, you know, when they show up as themselves, those are the people
Hmm.
that we learn interested in, and it's their depiction of characters that we are drawn to. So
Hmm.
I think separating the idea of the actor and the character and the self is something that's quite heavy.
Hmm.
And you can if you can find a way to make that feel less heavy and still, you know, uh, do the work, whatever work you're doing justice, then I think that's the way to go.
Nice. Fabulous. So, what can we expect from the Tiger Face show? Is there any teasers you can give us about future sort of projects, things that we might see happening soonish, or is it all hush hush at the moment?
It's not too hush hush. It's very unknown. So it's
Okay.
hush hush. We don't know, but we reflected like all the team, like shout out to that entire team. I mean, there's way more people like behind the work than you think, and there was like a producer behind the work and somebody else coming in to facilitate some stuff. And that all those people were part of its success, and so the conversation is like
Hmm.
with me and those people at the moment. Charlotte is really, really keen. The director is really keen to get it to China.
Okay.
Big market, Chinese marketplace. I don't know if that's a thing. But for me, I would just quite like it to have a bit more life before I know I need to move on and do something else. Because it's
Hmm.
been many my life. And so I'm thinking like maybe an international tour and a slightly different venues tour
Hmm.
in England. So using the kind of the amazing, incredible like reviews and the feedback and the audience feedback. I mean, we had an amazing time on this tour and met so many incredible people, and so I would love to
Hmm.
give the work a second, like third, well, it's probably its fifth life, but like for that to conclude the work, and then for me to move on to another project, I
Hmm.
think.
And where can people stay up to date with you and the show?
Amazing. So if you're interested and if you want to maybe see the Tigerfish show in the future or anything else that we make together, you can go to my website, which is www.justinteddycliffe.co.uk,
Mhm.
and all of the information's on there. Or you can follow me on Instagram at Justin Ted Cliffe. And those are probably the two best ways,
Hmm.
and probably the ways I talk about my own work. Yeah.
Fabulous. I'll put the links in the description below so people can just scroll down and click away. But I will end the same way I started, just by saying thank you so much for taking the time out and sitting down and chatting with me.
You know what, Rhys? Thank you so much. And like the work you're doing here, doing this kind of stuff, and extending the life of shows outside of the room that they exist in, letting people access it, like by doing
Hmm.
interviews and writing your reviews. Like I've read through a few of your reviews, and it's great. I really really appreciate it, and I think like it's really important actually
Hmm.
for the sector and for theatre at the moment. So thank you, mate.
Thank you so much, and I shall speak to you soon.